All right. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Hoop Journal podcast. Today, I'm joined by Lee Branscome of WhichCarolina Sports. Lee, how you doing today?
Man, I'm doing great. Anytime I can chop it up with another Hoops fan and spout some opinions about Hornets basketball, I'm down to do it. So I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. I'm glad to have you on. So before we get into the Hornets, just tell me a little bit about yourself and how WhichCarolina Sports came to be.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and long story short, I played basketball out on the eastern part of the state at a small Division II college called Chowan University, which is near Greenville, close to East Carolina. I'm sure you have somewhat of a North Carolina listening base on this pod, so that they'll get the geographical
Yeah.
mentions. Coached at Chowan after I played for a few years, and then made the transition out of the athletic world, I guess, to the corporate world in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I'm going to watch hoops no matter what I do. And with the coaching background and the playing background, I thought the best thing to do was cover the Hornets, a team I enjoy, and cover the NBA draft because I like doing talent evaluation. So it's a side fun thing for me, but I love talking to people like you. So thanks for having me on, and thanks for letting me yeah. So, and then just if people want to listen to the Which Carolina podcast, it's on any streaming platform. Follow me on Twitter at Which Carolina. Like I already said, draft, Hornets, hoops. That's pretty much what we're about.
Yep. And the draft is actually how I found out about you. I watched the video you did with Raphael over at NBA Draft Junkies.
He's
I
the
did a video with
best.
him like maybe 2 or 3 weeks before you were on there, so that's how I discovered you. Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on, talk about the Hornets. They've sort of become my second team, my adopted team, because I live in Charlotte now. I'm not a big two teams guy. Like, I think having a favorite team is sort of like having a quarterback. Either you have one or you have none. But
Mm.
I'm seeing that I live in Charlotte. They're the team I'm now most invested in outside of my Celtics. So
I was gonna say, I feel like you can have the team that truly kind of, revs you up as a fan, and then you can cover a team, and you're in Charlotte, so you can kind of look at it that way. But I know what you're saying because that's cool, man.
absolutely. So all right, so let's get into the Hornets. So we know that LaMelo Ball, he's probably the front runner right now for Rookie of the Year. Gordon Hayward, that signing's been great. Malik Monk, he's having sort of like a resurgent season. He's bouncing back, finally shooting the ball the way I thought he would. But what's one aspect of this Hornets season that you think is sort of going under the radar, not getting enough coverage right now?
Yeah, well, you hit on some great storylines right there, and I'll preface it by saying, as a lifelong Hornets fan, and now kind of trying to look at myself as covering the team to a degree, it is a bit strange to have kind of a national spotlight on
Mhm.
the Charlotte Hornets right now, like you said, because of LaMelo. Not only what he brings from like a pop culture standpoint, but what he has legitimately brought on the court. And like you
Right.
said, he's the leading candidate for Rookie of the Year. He deserves every bit of attention and praise he's getting right now because he looks like a special 19-year-old.
I agree.
Um, I think that's being covered enough, though, right? So I think
Yeah.
you asked a really interesting question, like what isn't being covered. The Hornets from an offensive rating and defensive rating standpoint are basically middle of the road. So there's really nowhere to lean and say this team is special on that specific end of the court. Rozier, I think, is kind of an all-world shooter from an analytics standpoint. It is getting attention, at least in the basketball centric world. And Hayward's resurgence, like you
Mhm.
said, is also, I think, known by most basketball fans. I think the sneaky interesting part about this team is actually looking ahead to the summer
Mhm.
and kind of a low key, fascinating offseason coming up for the Charlotte Hornets. Bismack Biyombo, Cody Zeller are both free agents. The Hornets are obviously thin at center anyway. They do have two young prospects in Kerry Jr. and Nick Richards, but as much as I like both those guys, you just can't depend on second rounders right away, especially for a team that's trying to make the playoffs. So do they bring back Cody? Do they draft a young center? We'll probably talk about that later. Or do they try and make a move at the deadline to acquire a center? That's the true hole in this roster, right?
Yeah.
Everything else is pretty buttoned up. So I think the offseason, looking ahead to also Malik Monk and Devontae Graham's free agency, is fascinating now. And then The last thing I'll say is the clutch play. The Hornets are 11-5 in clutch games as defined by the NBA. They lead the NBA in field goal and three-point percentage in those games. So basically the Hornets just don't miss in close games at the end of games right now. That's probably not super sustainable, but it's interesting because of their awesome guards and the way we play.
Absolutely, yeah. So yeah, I wasn't expecting you to take that off season, but I'm glad you did because that's something I've been thinking about too. Because yeah, that center spot is definitely the spot where I think they sort of take the next step with the roster. So I think that's super interesting. What do you think the chances are of them bringing back Zeller, Biombo, or both?
Yeah, well, you look at Biz, I think, at the money he got last year, which was basically the veteran minimum. And if you want to bring him back as your third center on that same type of deal, that seems reasonable to me. Biz is not a guy you want playing 25 to 30 minutes a game. And I love Biz. He's a spot rotation center, and he shouldn't be more than that on a team that wants to do anything serious.
I agree, yeah.
But he's good as a third center. Bring him back on the veteran minimum. Totally think that would be great. Cody's more interesting. You've seen how important he's been as he returned from injury. The lineups with Biz at center were getting crushed. Cody at least makes the non-PJ at the 5 minutes, because we know the Hornets play very well when PJ's at the 5.
Yep. We're going to get into that
general.
For sure. Yep.
But Cody's at least able to hold the water when he's in at the center. Basically, his net rating with his center lineups is almost even, right? Which is kind of the Hornets' net rating in general. So they exceed at minutes with PJ at the 5. Zeller can hold water. You try to look at comparisons. I think Plumlee got 3 for $27 million, somewhere in that range. Derek Favors was also in that range. I don't know that Zeller's as good a player as either one of those guys, but the unique qualities he brings to this team and the deficits that this team has, you could see them paying to bring him back on a reasonable deal because they do have the space to do it. But the problem is that's not a long-term fix either. Cody Zeller's a league average center. He's important to this team, but they're going to have to find, either through the draft or through acquiring a guy like Nikola Vucevic, which all of Hornets Twitter seems to want right now. The solution is not apparent, and that's what they have to figure out.
Yeah, I agree. I think Zeller is that perfect sort of stopgap center. Like, he's really important to the team right now, but long term, with where the Hornets want to go, he can't be that important to their team. So yeah, I think you said it well. And I agree with Biombo too. I think as a third center, he's a good guy to have. I like his energy, but like you said, more than 25 minutes a game shouldn't be his role. So yeah.
Let me ask you, in terms of the guards too, because it's almost like two separate situations. It's Biz and Cody, and then it's Monk and Devontae Graham. Obviously, LaMelo Ball gives them more flexibility because of how good he's been.
Right.
I mean, not to ask you a question on your own pod, but just to kind of kick it back and forth. Like, do you think they bring back both Monk and Devontae Graham?
Ooh, I think it comes down to what Malik Monk's restricted free agency comes down to. Like, if someone like, I don't know, say the Kings move on from Buddy Hield and they throw an offer sheet at Malik Monk, if that's too high of a number, I could see them letting him go. But at the right number, I definitely see them bringing both back. If it were me, I think I would probably let Devontae walk, because I think what he brings, you kind of already have from LaMelo, Rozier, and Monk. And so I think consolidating those minutes probably makes more sense. But I wouldn't be surprised if they brought both of them back. And I think it would make some sense at the right number.
Yeah. I think the Malik Devontae question is actually pretty interesting, because it actually might be a reality. They literally may have to choose between the two. And we actually talked about this on the BuzzBeat pod the other night, which is a good Hornets pod too. And I lean just barely towards Devontae because of his playmaking and because having two point of attack playmakers is important. And the Hornets finally have two now with Devontae and LaMelo, although LaMelo is more dynamic in a lot of ways. But it's splitting hairs, man. Like, I would love to have them both back. Malik's also 3 years younger, so you got to factor that in. Yeah. So it's not like it doesn't at all. It's crazy how young he is. People don't realize that.
Also, how much older Graham is too, because he came to the league.
He's 26, later. Right? Yeah, totally. So that's a factor. And so, like I said, I barely lean Devontae, but if it ended up being Malik coming back on a reasonable number, like you said, and handing over the entire kind of playmaking keys or drafting a point guard, which we can talk about later, I think I would be totally, I don't think that would be a mistake, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Right. Right. So yeah, like you said, there's a lot of guards in the mix there. So
Right.
Borrego has been, I think it was maybe the middle of January when he started doing this. It was around the same time that LaMelo was inserted in the starting lineup, just playing the 3-guard lineup, LaMelo, Graham, and Rozier. What are your thoughts on that lineup? Do you think it's something that the Hornets can rely on for, long stretches of games, or is it more of just like just an occasional thing that they can do?
Well, you hit it on the head, man, in terms of kind of the timeline of how that played out. You could see early in the season that Borrego um, either didn't want to have to rely on it yet or hadn't conceptually thought about that as a functional lineup. But just like you said, he kind of eased into it around that timeline you laid out. And as it played better and better, and for the 3-guard lineup, we're talking about LaMelo Ball, Terry Rozier, and Devontae Graham all being on the court at the same time together. So it's funny because you can almost literally see in real time Borrego warming up to it slowly because he's playing it more and more and more as the season goes along. Obviously, over the last 2 weeks with Devontae Graham being out, it's been a different 3-guard lineup. It's been Monk, LaMelo Ball, and Terry Rozier, and we can talk about both of them. But I was calling for it early in the season, and the reason why that is because you saw it be successful last year, although with completely different players, don't get me wrong. But Oklahoma City played that 3-guard lineup of SGA, Chris Paul, and Dennis Schroeder, who's now in LA, and they were fantastic.
Absolutely.
Again, I'm not comparing any of our guards to Chris Paul, but you get the point I'm making. Like, if you have enough variety and you have enough shooting with the way the NBA is played now, you can get away with playing with 3 talented guards, and you could almost argue it's an advantage at this point. So, and then if you just want to back it up with numbers, the Ball, Rozier, Graham lineup has played up 200 possessions basically, which is a small sample size, but enough to draw some conclusions. They're plus 25.6, which is just ridiculous, basically. They score 130 points per 100 possessions. And in the clutch, you see it more and more too. You see us finishing with those lineups. The Monk Rozier Ball lineup was a little less successful. It was about flat from a net rating standpoint. It held water. It was used late in games, particularly like in the Sacramento Kings comeback.
Yep. That was a crazy game.
That was probably the craziest game of the year by far, obviously. So I guess my point here is, yes, I think it's sustainable. Yes, I think we'll see it more. And I also think it's a useful closing lineup because of the variety, the playmaking, and how many guys on the floor at one time can pass, dribble, shoot. That puts pressure on defenses and creates open jumpers normally. So, I think we'll keep seeing it.
Yep. I agree with basically everything you just said. I think when you can put multiple playmakers on the floor, multiple guys that can, put the ball on the floor and create something on their own, that's always, that's where the NBA is trending. I need to know though where you found those numbers, because I spent about 25 minutes looking for the net rating and stuff like that on those 3-guard lineups, and all I was able to find was an article that was written on February 14th. So I need to know where you found those numbers.
Yeah. So I did get those specifically from Cleaning the Glass, which is a really good kind of analytical website. But there's also another one that I can't think of the name on right now that you can play with and figure out kind of net rating on lineups. And it's just freely available. So I'll shoot you the link after our interview. I wish I could remember the website to tell other people where to go, but it's a good one too.
Okay, awesome. I just needed to know that because I spent too much time and not being able to find it. But yeah, so I like the 3-guard lineup too. I think it's super effective. And the numbers that you have on like their offensive rating is actually higher than what I had through the middle of February. So it's continuing to get better.
Right.
And so we can sort of transition to the next thing I wanted to talk about, because I was gonna say I like the way that James Borrego has sort of slowly integrated that 3-guard lineup. Because I think I compare it to when the Hawks drafted Trae Young. Like from the moment they made that trade on draft night when they swapped Luka, from that moment on, every decision they've made has been Trae Young is our franchise centerpiece, and like everything has been catered around him. And I think as a result, he's sort of, I mean, he's a great offensive player, but he's sort of been able to just do whatever he wants. And I think long term,
Mm-hmm.
that's probably not good for them. I don't think the way the Hawks are trending, they're not, building a championship contender with the way it's going. But I think with the Hornets, James Borrego has slowly brought LaMelo along and not put too much on his plate right away. And I think that's been really big for him because not that he wouldn't have been able to handle it, but I think
Right.
had he been a starter right away and maybe had an inefficient 2 or 3 weeks to start the season, Bleacher Report starts posting about it and it just sorts to pile on. So I like the way that Borrego's gone about it. And I want to know what you think about James Borrego, how he's done this year and where your thoughts are on him as the long-term coach for this team.
Sure, yeah. And I think you laid that out super intelligently. Why why maybe there was some hesitancy from James Borrego to just roll out LaMelo full tilt right away. Obviously, it did not take long for Hornets fans, the coaching staff, his teammates to figure out he was an incredibly effective player at 19-year-olds immediately in the NBA. He was kind of really forced into the starting lineup more than anything, with Devontae Graham going out for injury and has just excelled. So that's a great point. I mean, I was never concerned with him whether he was or wasn't starting at the beginning of the season. I thought the overall development trend and the fact that he was in games when it mattered was far more important than whether he starts a game or not.
Mm-hmm.
He deserves to start now, and he should. So it's a moot point at this point. But to answer your question, I think obviously, in my opinion, and not everyone agrees with this, I think James Borrego has probably done like an A job. I mean, he probably hasn't done an A+ job because, that's lofty. That's basically perfect, which no coach is. And he has his flaws, and he's unproven, right? Like, if this young core goes where we think it can go over the next 5 years, we don't yet know if James Borrego can be an effective in-game playoff head coach. That's just uncertain because we haven't
he
seen
hasn't been there yet. Right.
Totally. So I'm not saying that Borrego necessarily will be the long-term guy, coach LaMelo his whole career. We don't know that yet. But what we do know so far in the 2 years that we have is he's an incredible player development coach. And it doesn't matter to me whether that's him directly implementing that or it's his ability to delegate that through the program and player development all the way down to the G League. Whatever he's doing, it's working.
Mm-hmm.
Devontae Graham's an example of that. PJ Washington's an example of that. Miles Bridges is an example of that. Miles Bridges has never had a summer where he got 15% better quickly, like you see in a guy like Jaylen Brown this year, right? Who's just made a complete jump. You haven't seen that yet with Miles, but you have seen like 4 to 7% improvements every single year.
And that's the same sort of trajectory that Jaylen Brown was on. He was slowly making those improvements, getting better each and every year. And then I think the bubble played a big part in that too, because that was sort of like an offseason for guys as well. So, and now you see that again, Jaylen Brown taking that huge step. So yeah, I think Miles Bridges, he's making that slow progression. I could see him making a similar jump though too, to being like an all-star caliber player.
Agreed. And even if you don't though, worst case scenario, I think he's going to continue to slowly and consistently improve. Obviously integrating Rozier and Hayward has been impressive, I think, in my opinion. All those are two veteran pros who know how to play. So it's not like that was necessarily some complicated job, but he's done it good job, especially when you consider he's convinced Miles Bridges to come off the bench after starting his entire career. People can say, oh, that's easy to do, but it's not. It's not easy going from a starting featured guy to having to come off the bench and create your own energy. And Miles Bridges, he deserves a lot of credit for that, but so does James Borrego. Convincing Terry Rozier to slide off ball once we started to realize that Devontae Graham was developing as a real NBA playmaker. Mm-hmm. Terry Rozier came to Charlotte expecting to be a point guard and replacing Kemba Walker, and he willingly slid off ball to become an all-world shooter, because Devontae Graham was developing on the ball. And again, Rozier deserves credit for that, but so does James Borrego. So I think he's done a good job managing personalities. I think he's done a good job from a player development standpoint. I don't have really anything bad to say about James Borrego besides the fact that let's wait and see what he can do if this team actually ascends to serious playoff basketball.
Right. Yeah, I think he's done everything you could reasonably expect of him to this point.
Right.
And now it's just, like you said, wait and see. Hopefully the Hornets make the playoffs this season. I got them penciled in as a playoff team.
That's controversial on Hornets Twitter, though. Not everybody loves Borrego.
Really?
Not everybody loves him.
What are the fans' complaints about Borrego?
Well, they don't love that he plays the Martin twins, which I can honestly sympathize with to some degree. Like, I do think the Martin twins have some utility depending on the night, depending on the matchups, depending on how they're playing. I think the fans would rather see McDaniels because he's younger and longer and more exciting, and he's played well in spurts too. So it's not like I necessarily disagree sometimes with their complaints. They just take it way too far. Right, it's like, that's a small thing. Like,
hey, that's just part
nitpick.
of that's just part of being a fan, though. That's what they do.
You love the passion, right?
Right. I got to be honest. I don't think I've been able to differentiate between the Martin twins when I see them out there. Like, they're still kind of just one person. Like, I know there's two of them, but I never know which one's which when they're out on the floor. I still haven't been able to figure that out.
It's tough. The only way I can tell them apart is Caleb is 10 and he's the shooter, and Cody is 11 and he's more of the defender, tough guy. He rarely takes jumpers, and 10, which is Caleb, is always taking threes. He can put it on the ground and elevate around the rim. They both can a little bit, but yeah, Caleb's the shooter. Cody's the get his roll his sleeves up guy.
Right. Okay, all right. I'll keep that in mind. So now I'll know. Okay. All right. So now we transition to I wanted to talk about Hornets potentially making moves at the deadline. The trade deadline is the 25th of March, so 3 weeks away from today. Where do you think they're standing at? 17 and 18 right now? Seed doesn't matter so much because we know the Eastern Conference 4 to 12. It's like a game and a half apart. So I think they're like the 6th seed as of today, but that doesn't mean much to me. They're 17 and 18. Where do you think the Hornets, if at all, what moves do you think the Hornets should be looking to make in terms of like a buy versus sell standpoint? Do you think they should be trying to add a piece to make a playoff push, or maybe, like trading Zeller because he's on an expiring, or a move like that? Like, which direction, if at all, do you think they should go at the deadline?
Yeah, well, I think you made an important distinction there, because it's always buy or sell, but there is a third option, and the third option is doing nothing. I'm not saying that's necessarily what they should do, but that is part of the calculus that people don't normally consider.
Right.
LaMelo changed everything. I mean, and I said this before the season. It was like, yes, PJ Washington needs to develop. Yeah, let's see how Miles Bridges comes along. Let's see if Devontae Graham can add anything on offense besides passing and shooting threes. Can he start to – but all of that at the end of the day, honestly, is noise. And LaMelo Ball now, as the centerpiece of this franchise with the number 3 pick, and the way he's played and how young he is and the way he impacts games on both ends with just pure basketball instincts that are frankly mind-blowing at times. That's changed the calculus for what this team has to do at the deadline, in my opinion, because if you would have asked me this before the season, I would have assumed that LaMelo Ball was going to be good, but maybe not transcendent. And right now he's trending towards that.
Right.
So I think you have to keep Zeller. And I would have said prior to the season, you offload Zeller for maybe a first-round pick to a team that you can convince they're one backup center away from contending. And now I don't think that would be prudent at all, because I do think this team will make the playoffs. You made a great point. It doesn't really matter where they are in the standings right now. They're going to be anywhere from 11 to 4, honestly. Right. I mean, are they going to outcompete your Celtics? I don't think so, but it's possible. It's not insane, right? So my point here basically is every single piece that's in the rotation right now is so integral to the team and contributes to a level where them being out of the rotation would significantly change the ultimate success of this team, I think.
Right.
And you want to provide, if you're going to make the playoffs, and it's going to be LaMelo Ball's debut in the playoffs for a player that you hope is winning you playoff series for a long time, you should give him a chance to be successful on the first run. And that may not even mean winning a playoff series. It just means having at least enough reasonable pieces around him to facilitate a successful playoff journey in his first time in. And then you can figure out the rest in the offseason. I don't necessarily think they should trade any of the young assets to acquire a 30-year-old like Nikola Vucevic, although he's a fantastic player and is an all-star right now. He doesn't necessarily fix our flaws at center. He's a way better offensive center than Cody Zeller, but he's not a rim protector.
Right.
And that's what the Hornets don't really have right now. So if it was me, I would mostly hang tight. Maybe you look to acquire another young prospect, but don't send out any of yours. Don't compromise draft equity. Keep all your picks. Take this team, see where it can go. Let LaMelo Ball have a successful first venture, hopefully into the playoffs, and then let's figure it all out in the offseason, which is going to be an interesting offseason.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And I agree. I think I was looking around to see like if there was maybe a move that could be made. And there really wasn't one other than just making a trade to make a trade. There wasn't really anything that I think really would be worthwhile, because I think if they were to move on from someone that's in the rotation, I think unless they were getting back a player that you could argue was better, I think
Right.
it sends a bad sign to the players if they were to make a move like that like they aren't maybe focused on making the playoffs. So yeah, I think they're most likely better off just sitting still, just staying where they're at and seeing where this roster takes them in terms of a playoff seed this season.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I was more hopeful for them trading for like a young center. And obviously that probably would have taken some assets that would have hurt to ship out as well. But a guy like Jared Allen, who did get dealed, that's the kind of profile of the center we need. We need a long rangy rim protector that can be functional in the pick and roll with LaMelo and protect the lane a little bit, which is something we're missing to a degree.
Yeah. I mean, if you could have given up a pick that was going to be between 25 and 30, because that's what it took to get Jared Allen, I mean, yeah, you would have given up that. So
I agree.
I could talk about Jared Allen all day. He's one of my favorite players. But yeah, you were talking about, the Hornets do need rim protection. They've been using PJ Washington at the 5, which I really love. It's a lineup I really like. I really like PJ Washington as a small ball 5. I have a couple of numbers I want to throw out to you, though, about PJ Washington at the 5. So according to Basketball Reference, of their 11 most used lineups in terms of just minutes played, 5-man lineups, their 2 best in terms of net rating are with Rozier, Bridges, Hayward, Washington, and then one of LaMelo or Graham. So the one with LaMelo has played 41 minutes. They're a plus 10.2 per 100. And then if you slide Graham in for LaMelo, it's 31 minutes and they're a plus 21, which is a combined 70 minutes, a small sample size. But
so it's basically that Hayward, Bridges, PJ front court with a combination of the guards, essentially.
Yeah. Both of the lineups I just pulled had Rozier in them, and there was just one of LaMelo or Graham. But I didn't look up another combination in the backcourt. Those are the 2 I had, because those were the top 2 that they had in net rating.
The PJ at the 5 lineup it's been a gold mine for the Hornets all year. I mean, in the early season when Biz was starting, because Cody Zeller was hurt, they were getting smashed in those minutes. And then when they would downsize and PJ would play at the 5, they would win those minutes. And part of that, of course, was LaMelo Ball coming off the bench. None of this is in a vacuum. But like you said, when you zoom out and you look at the most successful Hornets lineups from a net rating standpoint, and it's pretty distributed across the offensive and defensive end. I mean, they're obviously hell on wheels from a spacing standpoint when PJ Washington is in the game on offense, but the net defensive rating isn't exactly much lower than that. It's a fairly even keel that produces this net positive rating when PJ Washington plays at center. And I think some of that too is like Bridges at the 4 is awesome and fun, and he can be very effective there. And then Hayward just provides you this kind of wiggle in the joints, 2-way forward that can play make, that can space, that can defend. Obviously, he carries water in a lot of different buckets for this team. So, I think that, frankly, from a lineup standpoint, it's like PJ at the 5 has been the biggest revelation, I think, next to the 3-guard lineup that we talked about earlier. But the PJ at the 5 is much more proven over a larger sample size than the three-guard lineup. Interesting, but experimental. PJ works.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think unless the Hornets are going up against Embiid or Anthony Davis or Jokic, someone like that, I
They're
think
in
it's
a
a
world of
super.
hurt either way with that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. Right. So I think when you have like a guy like Washington at the 5, someone like Hayward in the lineup, like those guys are just so versatile for front court players that,
Absolutely.
especially when you pair him with LaMelo, who's such a savant playmaking. I mean, like you're just so versatile on the offensive end, and then defensively you can switch a lot too. LaMelo 6'8" at the guard spot, so it's just so much versatility in that lineup. I really like the potential of those, like that combination.
No question about it. You can do a lot of different things with that lineup, and LaMelo gives you size at the guard position, which was lacking in this guard rotation. I mean, Rozier, Graham, and Monk, they're awesome players, but let's face it, all 3 of them are undersized.
Right.
So LaMelo brings a little bit of balance to that calculus.
Yeah, and going back to the 3-guard lineup, I think that's one of the reasons why it's as effective as it is, because LaMelo's big enough to handle some of those, and especially with time too, that'll get better as he adds strength.
Absolutely.
Yeah, being 6'8", that allows you to guard a lot of different guys, especially, he has those defensive instincts as well. So yeah, I really like the potential of this Hornets team. They got a lot of young guys that I think have really high ceilings. I think a lot of them fit well together. It's an exciting time in Charlotte.
It is. Well, and I think the drawback to this young core has forever been great. It's fun. It's interesting. But how is Charlotte going to ever get a superstar? And now they may have one. And I don't think it's overstating it to say that LaMelo Ball could potentially be a superstar. I mean, I thought that coming into this draft. Obviously, the shooting is ahead of schedule. His defensive anticipation and steal rate and effectiveness on that end, although there are still flaws because every rookie struggles defensively in some sense. Right. He's just way, way ahead of schedule. And now that they have that, and you can build around that, theoretically, from what we've seen so far, you can build around that for the next decade. Things get a lot more interesting. And one of those questions is potentially answered. So I agree with. I mean, it's crazy how quickly it's happened, and the rebuild that Mitch Kupchak deserves a lot of credit for, James Borrego deserves a lot of credit for, and this young core that's developing, of course, deserves the ultimate credit because they're the ones doing it on the floor.
Yeah, yeah. I think you said it perfectly with LaMelo, ahead of schedule. Like he was the top player on my draft board, and this was
Good work.
the most scouting I've ever done on a draft class was this past year, which makes sense. We had all kinds of extra time, but yeah, I did not expect him to come into the league and just be this ready. Like I knew he had the confidence, the swagger. I knew he was incredibly gifted just as a basketball player in general, but I wasn't expecting him to be, this locked in defensively, because he was,
right.
I'm pretty sure statistically he was the worst defender in the NBL last year.
He was horrific. Horrific.
And I knew, like, I remember watching him and thinking, like, yeah, the instincts are there. He can play the passing lanes. But like, just as a pure on-ball defender, as a team defender, he's just been better than I would have expected.
No question. He fouls a lot. He sometimes gets back cut. He'll forget to make a rotation. But at the end of the day, those are all eventually fixable problems. And his ability to stay in front of guys and his defensive anticipation that you talked about is just off the charts. I mean, he leads the team in steals, and he's a 19-year-old rookie. Yeah. Steals and steal rate. So it's not just a fluffy stat, the steals per game. Like, he's actually doing it in a condensed amount of time. So, yeah, I can't say enough about it, man. I mean, it's shocking, honestly, and congrats to have him number one, because right now it looks like he's the best player in this class. He was fourth on my board, only behind Edwards, Halliburton, who's been awesome too. And honestly, those two are more similar than anyone realized. I mean, they're both just incredibly instinctual players on both ends, and kind of affect the game in similar ways too. Halliburton less on ball probably, but as an offensive connector. And then it was Patrick Williams, just because I think he's a future star. And then I had LaMelo fourth. So obviously, if I could take it back now, I'd switch that around a little bit. But I still think Edwards can be pretty good too, honestly. He's just – right now he's a volume guy. He's not efficient, but he flashes some of the best stuff you can see in this class.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's tough when you're in Minnesota too. So I don't want to put too much stock in. I don't want to put too much stock into a rookie playing for the Timberwolves right now. But yeah, I like what I've seen. The flashes are there for sure. And with Halliburton, yeah, I think he was fourth on my board. I want to say it was LaMelo, Okongwu.
I liked Okongwu a lot too.
Yeah, and I'm nervous.
It's early.
It's early, yeah, but I'm a little nervous.
But at the end of the day, and this was not to get too off track, but my one thing with Okongwu was like, how often does 6'8", 6'9", like centers really work in the NBA? Like Bam's a complete outlier, and he's bigger.
Yeah.
And so, but Okongwu showed some passing flashes too. He's obviously a unique defender. I'm not counting him out by any means, but I'm at least, I'm keeping an eye on it. It's like,
right. You're monitoring it.
Not great returns. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I'm holding my stock for now, but
absolutely,
I'm monitoring it for sure. But yeah, back to LaMelo though. When you were talking about the similarities between him and Halliburton, just the way they impact the game, I think that will be LaMelo's path to superstardom. Is just the way that he sees the game. He seems to be just a half step ahead of guys most of the time. And I think that's really his biggest strength, is just his basketball IQ, just his feel for the game when he's out on the court. Like he's just on a higher level, it feels like, when it comes to just thinking basketball and just thinking ahead, reading the defense, reading the offense when he's on defense. I think that will be sort of what LaMelo can bank on as he develops into a potential superstar.
Yeah, I think you said it earlier. You said he's like kind of like a basketball savant. I mean, that's the best way to put it. He thinks the game at a level that is mind-blowing when put into action, when it's executed. Right. And you see him. I mean, and it's a multitude of things. It's him poking the ball away from an opposing player that just rebounded the ball on a Hornets miss. I mean, he does that like once a game, it feels like. Mm-hmm. And that's pure feel. That's all that is. That's him realizing where the ball's going, that rebounding player doesn't know he's there, mm-hmm. and that he has the hand-eye coordination to poke his hand exactly in there where the ball is and take it away. That's just like one small example. You see him shoot passing lanes too,
Right.
So I agree with you, but I will say that's all well and good, and it's important, and it is totally his best and most, like, it's his superpower, is his instincts. But he also, of course, is huge as a point guard. And, man, I will tell you, his ability to abuse switches has been really impressive to me. I wasn't exactly expecting that.
Yeah.
He shows like real acceleration when he needs it. He's deceptive in terms of, the way he wiggles when he drives and all the little herky-jerky stuff he has. But he can also just blow by bigger guys and go dunk the ball. Like, he's going to get more athletic too. Yeah. I mean, he's going to be a guy who's blowing past defenders that aren't suited to play with him and dunking on help side defenders, like, within a couple of years. Like, that's totally going to be happening.
Yeah, that's where I was going to take it next. I was going to bring up his athleticism, because it was probably my biggest concern when I was scouting him, was that, like, he didn't have the quickest first step. He wasn't really someone that blew by a lot of guys. He was just more crafty with his dribble and things like that. But yeah, he's been really impressive with, like, his ability to beat switches. And like you said, like, I do think within 2 or 3 years, we're going to see him, abuse a mismatch, blow, right by his defender, get to the rim and dunk on somebody. Yeah.
I think that's coming. That's coming. And you may see it happen, once or twice, mm-hmm. but, like, he will be a guy that is fearsome at the rim, I think. He's never going to be a young Andre Iguodala type, but he's big enough, and he's going to be creating so many of those opportunities, mm-hmm. because And look, the shooting has to stay on target, and it is so far, and it's been impressive. And the way he shoots is unconventional in some sense, but he finishes so pure, and he shoots a high arcing soft ball.
Yeah.
That those returns are good too so far, and the free throw percentage looks good. So as long as because like you said, he's not the quickest, but he's quick enough. As long as the shooting keeps defenders close to him, he's going to be going by guys.
Exactly. Yeah. And that shot is going to be key because I don't know. I want to say he's shooting above 40% from three right now.
I think it's like 38 right now, but it's close.
Right. Yeah. So right now, like, yeah, defenders have to step out on him. They have to go over on the pick and rolls. But we saw with Lonzo, if the shot starts to not fall, guys go under, and all of a sudden those driving lanes aren't there. So, how long do you think it'll take before you're sold that LaMelo is a good shooter?
I would say this. If it was like a betting thing, like I think LaMelo will be a good shooter. I'll put it that way. Right now, purely off the percentages, and I say this all the time, like the percentages are the signal. Like it doesn't really matter necessarily what you think of a player's jumper, although mechanics of course matter, but the percentage is the signal. And what that means is like if over large sample sizes, which is one season and longer, the percentages bear out that a player is a good three-point shooter, they're a good three-point shooter. And so that's a long way of saying I believe in LaMelo's jumper from what I've seen so far. I do think in the playoffs when things get tighter, that'll be interesting to see how teams defend him and whether – and he's 19. Like he may not be ready for that yet on the biggest stage. That's an incredible ask of any player. But how will we see him negotiate defenses that are more keyed in on exposing some of his flaws as a young player?
I think if he comes into next season and he's still like, let's say he finishes the season out at 38%, what he's at right now.
That's a win. That's a huge win.
Yeah, exactly. I think we'll know for sure, maybe not for sure, but we'll have a better idea. I think once he gets into a playoff series or once his second season rolls around and teams really have film on him, I think if he can continue to hit at league average or above, once there's film on him or once he's in a playoff series, then I think you can know for sure that he's going to be a reliable shooter.
No, that's great. Like, and because your original question was like, how long? And it's one season. After this season, if they're in the playoffs, let's see how that goes. Let's look at the end of year percentages from the rookie, and we'll have a better idea. But right now, if you would have given this option to Kupchak and Borrego before the season and say, hey, at the All-Star break, LaMelo Ball is going to be shooting 38% of the season from three on the season, they would say, fast forward, I'll take it. Like, that's a huge win. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, all right. So now I want to talk about some draft stuff because I know you do a lot of draft scouting yourself. So the Hornets right now, like I said, they're the 6th seed in the East, but that doesn't mean much right now. They're going to be in the thick of in the playoff race. So that leaves their draft pick somewhere in the, outside of the lottery, mid-20s perhaps, depending on where they finish. So who's someone that, assuming they do end up drafting in there, who's a guy that you think they should be targeting, or maybe a couple guys you have in mind? Because me personally, I haven't done too much on scouting a draft yet. I'm just sort of dipping my toe in the water with like the lottery guys and things like that. So who's a few guys that you're looking at, if any, in that range for the Hornets?
Yeah, and I'm on a similar path. I mean, I'm watching a lot of Hornets right now. I am consuming draft stuff for sure, but I'd say I might only be 30% of the way through this draft class, honestly.
Right.
But it's enough. And it depends, right? So if we're going to go for drafting another young center, which I think is a very reasonable possibility, particularly depending on what happens with the two veteran bigs we talked about earlier in the podcast. I think Isaiah Jackson from Kentucky is a guy that they will have to look at. He may be gone. I think I'm a little higher on him than most right now. Obviously, he is not an offensive threat probably at the NBA immediately besides finishing above the rim because he can really do that.
Yeah.
But he's a unique athlete and shot blocker. He runs the floor incredibly well, and he just fits that profile we were talking about earlier where the Hornets need a long, rangy, defensive, rim protective type center. And, man, he would be a heck of a lob partner for LaMelo Ball. So I like him. That was the main one I wanted to talk about. I think Day'Ron Sharpe is interesting from North Carolina. He's a big offensive and defensive rebounder. He leads the ACC in rebound percentage. He can shot block. He's got some emerging skills, particularly his passing is good. I don't know Garuba yet, the international player from Real Madrid. I haven't looked into him yet, but he's obviously a big that's in that range. I'll have to do more research on him. Just quickly before you share some of your thoughts, either on those guys or maybe a target you like, they could also go point guard. If Devontae Graham isn't back, they could go point guard in the first round, and that would still make sense. If you bring back Zeller and maybe try to acquire a center a different way, Deuce McBride from West Virginia is a great candidate there. Can do a little bit of everything on the offensive end and is a better athlete than people think. Sharif Cooper would be probably more of a long-term prospect, developmental, but he shows some really special ability to play, make, finish, and pass too. And then Jared Butler, of course, is just as steady as they come. So it just depends on what happened in free agency. But those are some guys I like, and I could see them taking depending on the situation.
Yeah, those are some great names in there. Isaiah Jackson is someone that I had no idea who he was before the season started, but yeah, I like what he brings. I think he does fit that mold that you were talking about. Is that just like rim protecting big? Daron Sharp is someone I like a lot too. I really like his playmaking potential as a big man. I would really like if they ended up with Sharp, a lineup with like if you just slid PJ at the 4, him with Hayward. Like that's in LaMelo, like that as a group that will move the ball around. So that would be interesting. And then Usman Garuba is someone that, like when I heard about him, I was really intrigued by what he might be, but I haven't gotten into scouting him yet. But he could be interesting because like the mold of who he's supposed to be, I think is really, really enticing.
I'm excited to check him out. I just haven't gotten to it yet.
Yeah, from what I understand, he's like a really versatile defender, potentially a 1 through 5 defender. Good playmaking instincts. But I can't really. I'm not going to give you a scouting report because that's how I understand who he is as a prospect. But then you talked about Sharif Cooper. I like him a lot. I'm not sure if he's a lottery prospect or not an NBA player, because I think he's an incredible basketball player, but I just don't know in the NBA, like with his size, I just don't. Yeah, he's small, so I don't know. I don't know how well that'll work out for him, but he is a really talented basketball player. Like if my big board was just who the best basketball players were, he's top 10 for sure.
Right.
But I just don't know whether or not it translates to the NBA. But I do like Sharif Cooper a lot. And then who else did you say? Jared Butler. I like him a lot. I had him. He was on my board somewhere last year, and then he ended up just not going in. But I think he's probably a first round lock. He's probably got one of the higher floors among any guard in college basketball right now.
That's exactly his value proposition is you pretty much know he's going to succeed. It's just, how much value can he truly bring? Mm-hmm. He's a safe pick. That's right. I think that's a great description.
And then there was someone else you mentioned too.
So that was pretty much everyone. I did have, Corey Kispert. I love him from Gonzaga. I'm not sure how much sense he makes for the Hornets with Hayward and Bridges. And sliding PJ down to the forward position if you have a more true traditional center in the lineup. So maybe there's a little bit of a log jam there, but I do think he's going to be just an immediate two-way productive shooter in the NBA with size. And
absolutely,
every team needs that, particularly when you have a dynamic young point guard that needs shooting around them.
Yeah, I think Corey Kispert in a vacuum is someone that any team would want, but like you said, there's a lot of minutes right now going to forward, so it would probably be tough to slide him in. But yeah, he's an incredible shooter. I think he's probably a better defender than what he's getting credit for. I think that happens a lot with guys who are labeled as shooters. They just assume that that's all they do is shoot. But Kispert's really strong. Like I think he could potentially be like a small ball 4. Like I think he could really guard some of those guys. So I really like Kispert, but yeah, I agree. I'm not sure if he'd be the best fit for the Hornets.
And then last thing I'll say is I'm still fairly bullish on Nick Richards, actually. He's a second-round pick, so the odds are stacked against him. I mean, if you look at it from a historical standpoint, there are massive hits in the second round. Don't get me wrong. We know the examples of that. But from a general statistics standpoint, like second-round picks just don't stick in the NBA. So you really got to be lucky to call one, but like I wouldn't be shocked if Nick Richards eventually is contributing at an NBA level, and maybe that's just as a backup. So I'm not saying he alters your plans and draft
right,
but I still think there's something there. I really do.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how the other 3 Hornets draft picks were doing, because I haven't I haven't really kept up with them. I remember being surprised that Grant Riller went 56th and then never heard a word about him again. So how do you know how those guys are doing in the G League right now?
Yeah, I mean Richards and Carey both have spectacular numbers in the G League. Carey, I think, because he's just so physically dominant,
Hmm.
and at that level, he can still really just use his brute force to kind of dominate inferior physical profile bigs that he comes up against. Richards, I think it's more because he's just like really skilled. He can step
Yeah.
out and shoot, which was a sneaky skill he had that I don't think people realize out of Kentucky. He's athletic. He's 7'1". He can block shots. That's why I'm just a little more bullish on him as a long-term prospect. But Carey just mixes it up in there and,
Yeah.
bowls people over and makes layups, kind of like a Ennis Cantor light type, if
That's
you want to think
exactly what I
about
was
it
going to
that
say. Yeah.
way.
Yep.
Riller, I wasn't ever super excited about Riller. I know some people had him as a first-round prospect. I didn't see, like, his ability to be able to separate at the NBA
Yeah.
level and play make and shoot. I mean, he's an okay shooter. He's been fine. I mean, and again, he's a second round pick. He'll probably be a two-way guy for a while. I'm pulling for him. I'm just not as personally bullish on him as like a long-term prospect as some other people.
Yeah. I think he finished like maybe mid 30s or so on my board. I forget
Yeah.
exactly. But a Riller.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He like yeah, like you said, the separation. Like he just I mean, he's playing at College of Charleston, so most of the guys he was playing were mid D1 competition anyway, and even then he didn't exactly stand out as an athlete. So I guess I wasn't too surprised to see that he hasn't gotten NBA minutes or anything like that, and maybe he will. And then between Carey and Richards, I think I like Richards more as an NBA player because, like you said, Carey is similar to Ennis Cantor. I think he's got a little bit more athleticism,
He
but
does. Yeah.
I think just his skill set and just where he's at as a player, I think is just more suited for the G League because, like, for him to be effective on an NBA floor, it would take too much usage, and you would just have like NBA teams just don't play through the post anymore. And so I just think with the way he can impact the game, it's just not like it's not providing much for an NBA team. I don't think. But I do think he is really good, like you said, like he's a
He
beast in
is.
the paint. But Richards, yeah, I think Richards has a little bit more NBA potential.
Agreed. Yeah, that's where I'm at. It's right now with those guys.
So one more thing I wanted to touch on. So we're at the All-Star break now. The Pistons. I mean, the Hornets do not play again until they go up against the Pistons on the 11th. So what are your expectations? We talked about it a little bit. We're expecting them to be a playoff team, but what expectations do you have for the second half of the season? Whether it be from a record standpoint or just something you want to see the team improve on? Just what are your expectations?
Yeah, well, it's been an interesting season because in the first half of the season, they were really a top 10 defense. And some of that was this kind of amoeba matchup zone that James Borrego was playing that he's really gone away from almost
Yeah.
completely now, but it worked for a stint. That was part of it. Teams were also shooting a poor percentage against the Hornets, particularly from three, even though the Hornets were allowing almost the most threes in the entire NBA and continue to do so. So basically what has happened, in short, the Hornets take the right type of shots on offense. They get a ton of rim attempts,
Yep.
and they get a ton of three-point attempts. They weren't shooting the ball early in the season, so they had an ineffective offense. The opposite was true on defense. They allowed a ton of threes. They allowed a ton of rim attempts, but teams weren't shooting well against them. Those averages have regressed to the means on both ends. And now the Hornets are the 16th ranked offense because they've started to make shots and they take the right type of shots. And they're the 19th ranked defense because they don't allow the right type of shots and teams are starting to make shots against them.
Right.
So just that kind of, which makes sense over large sample sizes. So just that kind of back and forth on if they can provide any type of solution to covering up team shooters a little bit better, because when they get beat against the Blazers, against the Raptors twice, those are examples that stick out right in your head of teams that just absolutely blitz the Hornets from three.
Yep.
And that can happen on any given night. But the offense is improving. So I'm watching that seesaw action of can they solve any of those three-point problems on defense? Can they continue to make shots and manufacture efficient offense? And where is that net rating going to live? And right now it's 19th. So they're going to make the playoffs, I think, I think they could even make the playoffs legitly, and by that I just mean be a 1 through 8 seed, even though they'd still be in the play-in if they're the 8th seed or the 7th seed.
Mm-hmm.
I think they'll finish in the top 8, and that's what I'm particularly paying attention to. The flaws on defense, and if the shot making can keep up on offense while enjoying what LaMelo Ball is all the time, of course.
Yeah, that's well said. And I think a lot of people who I guess aren't NBA nerds, people who don't dig into the numbers, probably don't realize how strong the correlation is between the type of shots you give up and just how good your defense is, and the same thing on offense. There's a very strong correlation between the number of threes you allow, the number of attempts at the rim you allow, and just how good your defense is. So yeah, that'll be something I'm gonna put on my radar too. Watching the Hornets defend the 3-point line.
And the only thing I would add to that is you're exactly right. The interesting thing though is it's okay to allow a ton of threes only if you protect the rim at an elite level.
Right, like the Bucks.
Exactly, like the Milwaukee Bucks. So if you have a guy like Giannis, and Brook Lopez is a pretty good rim protector as well, then you can afford to give up threes if you're elite at rim protection. The other caveat to that too is it depends on who you're giving the threes up to.
Right.
Like, you saw the other night and they came back in a wild way and won that Sacramento game, but Buddy Hield just had a field day.
Yeah.
And they've done that to really good shooters going back to last year even. So there's just a couple caveats there to like allowing threes and who you allow them to, and teams obviously like the Milwaukee Bucks, who have won 50 plus games for the past 3 years, have kind of perfected that. And the Hornets need to improve there.
Yeah, I agree. So I don't want to hold you longer than I have to. So is there anything before we get out here that you want to mention, whether it's Hornets related, NBA related, anything?
No, man, I think we covered it. You had some awesome questions and some great feedback. I learned a couple things from you on this pod. I appreciate you having me on. Would be happy to come back anytime you want to talk draft or Hornets. And like I said earlier, people can find us on Twitter at WhichCarolina and check out
all your plugs out there. Yeah.
And yeah, man, I really appreciate you having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Pleasure to have you on. And I'm definitely going to have you back on around draft time, because I know you do some great work over there with the draft. So yeah, look forward to that. So that's Lee Branscome that's Lee Branscome from WhichCarolina Sports. Again, thanks for coming on, and look forward to talking again soon.